Hello, my name is Dylan Hillebrand, and today I would like to talk to you about the city of Carthage, the seat of a classical African empire. I'd like to start by talking about this sentence: Carthago delenda est. In the middle of the 2nd century BC, nearly every time Cato, a Roman senator, would speak in public, he would conclude his speech with some variation of the phrase, Carthago delenda est. It translates to Carthage must be destroyed. These words have echoed throughout history. But why? What made Carthage so frightening to Cato that he made its total destruction his life's work? I'd like to go over with you today the origins and mythic foundation of Carthage, a little bit about its geography, both in terms of where it's located uh, as a singular city and the where it fits into the larger Mediterranean, its mercantile culture and art production, what life in the city was like, uh, its natural military expansion from a singular fortress to encompassing most of the western Mediterranean Sea, and ultimately the conflicts with Rome which brought about its downfall. Lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the legacy which the Punic city leaves. So, on the note of its mythic founding, according to the Aeneid, which is a one of the greatest pieces of Latin poetry, after a struggle for the throne in Tyre, which resulted in the assassination of her husband by her brother Pygmalion, Alicia, better known to us as Dido, fled westward from the city of Tyre with a cadre of loyal retainers and her husband's massive treasury, founding a new settlement, which they called Newtown. In the Carthaginian language, which is a Western Semitic language, it would translate from the term Carthage, which comes to us through Latin to get Carthage. Now, the Aeneid is clearly a work of fiction, but there are elements of truth to be found in it. While the Trojan War would have taken place in the 12th century BCE, Carthage was not actually founded until at 814 BCE at the earliest, as a colony of the Tyrians. Uh, they were a Semitic people from Canaan, known by the exonym Phoenicians. And following the Bronze Age collapse, the Canaanites established, well, their Phoenician successors, established a far-flung trade network that spanned the entire Mediterranean world and beyond. Now, previously, the largest sea power had been the Minoan Greeks, but with the collapse of Bronze Age civilization, there was a vacuum which opened up. And for about 300 years, the Phoenicians were the only ones making large-scale voyages in the sea. Here we can see uh, several settlements which the Phoenicians settled, including some as far westward as Spain and the Atlantic coast of North Africa, including numerous ones on the Mediterranean islands of Sicily and uh, Sard Sardinia. The oldest of these Phoenician settlements are Utica and Cadiz in North Africa and Iberia, respectively. They were founded approximately 1100 years BCE, and Carthage would be founded just a few miles down the coast in the Gulf of Tunis in the 9th century. Now, Tyre set up this massive trade network because they were located at a nexus point between the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Assyrians, and the Hittites. They were able to facilitate a great deal of overland trade. But naturally, following the Bronze Age collapse, empires began to reestablish their power base, and they sought to exert power over the Phoenician cities, which led to a waning of power for Tyre. Now, with this waning of power, the Phoenician colonial cities grew in a greater degree of independence and became the heart of this trading network. For centuries, Carthaginians' art culture was largely dismissed as being derivative of Greek work, if non-existent at all. These four images displayed here are from excavations done in Tunisia today, where we see an incredible level of craftsmanship native to Carthage. This picture here in the upper left-hand corner is a sippy cup intended for babies. One may note that it is shaped like a breast to encourage feeding. We see a carved copper hatchet with very detailed inscription work. We see this oil lamp here, which has a man's face, but if you look carefully along the bottom, when flipped over, we see a frog and a golden amulet. All of these are forms that are native to Carthage and were created in the city. They date to the periods during the Punic civilization. As I mentioned previously, a great deal of excavation has been done in the last several decades since Tunisia won its independence from France. We see here in the port that the city is labeled in a radial fashion, so that from just about any point in the city, one would have a view of the sea. The Carthaginians were a people who were very focused on seafaring culture. Their expeditions took them as far north as Cornwall in England and down to Senegal in West Africa, as well as regions of modern-day Ukraine. That is how far-flung their seafaring culture was. If we look at the city itself in this map, at the points labeled 4 and 3, we can see the dual harbors of Carthage. These two harbors served different functions. The first was the merchant's port, which was the destination for commercial and personal vessels, and it was one of the greatest ports of its era. However, hidden away from view was a second interior harbor. We saw the round harbor, at which the center of was a massive building on an island, which housed the Admiralty of Carthage. This second harbor was designed in such a way so that it was hidden from view, and that it was able to house the entire Carthaginian navy within it without being detected. The Romans did not know of this harbor until they had sacked the city for the final time. And here on this slide you can see an image of a Carthaginian bireme, which was the Phoenician style of ship, which allowed them to take these long-ranging trips. I'd like to talk a little bit about Carthaginian religion. The primary source of religion in Carthage was the Canaanite religion, which the Phoenicians had brought with them. However, over time, because of their massive trade network, many different kinds of people came into the city, and naturally they brought with them their own gods, including Greek, Egyptian, and Berber gods. If we look at the image in the top left, this is a depiction from the Roman period of 7 indigenous Berber gods. The bottom left image is a collection of Egyptian gods, including the Horus falcon, and the statue to the right is from the Temple of Demeter. All of these were found within the excavation of the city of Carthage, with most of these dating back to the Punic period. I chose to go with this Roman period Berber image. However, that was just because it was the best version I could find. One of the religious practices which the Phoenicians brought with them from Canaan that is pretty shocking to a lot of us today was the practice of human sacrifice. Most commonly practiced on children under the age of 4. Now, this was not a frequent thing. It wasn't like everybody was out there sacrificing their child all the time, but they believed that by making such a major sacrifice, it would either defer the wrath of their gods or show their dedication. And here on the slide pictured is a child cemetery from the Tophet of Carthage, the Tophet being the primary temple of the city. Now, eventually, as all states do, a military developed. While the city was primarily focused on trade, naturally it developed a navy to protect its overseas interests. The Carthaginians were a people who fought many wars, including against their Numidian and Libyan neighbors in North Africa, the Greek settlers who came into Sicily after they had already settled in the lands, and the Iberians in Spain. They fought dozens of wars, particularly in Sicily, over this territory. However, their greatest rival in the region was Rome, which had crushed Carthage's Etruscan allies. And ultimately, the two fought a series of 3 wars over the course of a century, which would bring about the downfall of Punic Carthage. The most famous of these conflicts is the Second Punic War, where following the defeat of Carthage in the First Punic War and the loss of their territory in Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, the Carthaginians sought to gain new imperial territory in Spain. From this power base, a great general, Hannibal Barca, and his brother Hasdrubal formed a plan to march the Carthaginian army and its numerous regional allies over the mountains south into Italy and waged a war of terror against the Romans, which lasted 20 years, pushing the Roman state almost to destruction. It was only after 20 years of brutal conflict that the Romans were able to mount a force to attack the Carthaginian homeland itself, and Hannibal was summoned back to defend the city and was forced to take the field at Zama against his tactical suggestion, and was defeated. For this, the Carthaginians were forced to pay a major war indemnity and had the walls of their city torn down. Into this world, Cato the Elder was born. He knew the threat that Carthage posed. Should they ever be allowed to grow strong again, Carthage would remember the horrors which Rome had inflicted upon it, and so called for a third Punic War, which ultimately led to the city being destroyed and the region being depopulated for nearly a century and a half. But after more than a century after its destruction, Rome rebuilt the city to function as a capital for its African province. Over the various centuries, different parties controlled the city, including the Vandals, the Byzantines, the Umayyads, the Aghlabids, and the Ottomans. Despite these numerous different peoples that came in and imposed foreign rule, many aspects of the older Punic culture were retained. And I didn't get a chance to speak about it earlier in the presentation, but one of the most powerful things that the Carthaginians managed to do was they pioneered numerous agricultural techniques, which led the region to be known as the breadbasket of the Mediterranean for centuries. It's why the Romans were able to switch from grain production in Italy to luxury crops like wine and olives. The legacy of the rebuilt Carthage is an incredible one in its own right. However, that is the end of our time today, as I just wanted to focus on the Punic period. If you have questions, feel free to leave a comment or email me at the address listed. Here are some of the sources I pulled from. You'll notice that they're not listed alphabetically, but instead I listed them based on the relevance to the topic at hand. The book at the top here, The Carthage, A Mosaic of Ancient Tunisia, was the source for the majority of my images, as well as a great summary of Punic culture. Thank you for your time, and I have really enjoyed this presentation. I hope you have enjoyed listening to it as much as I had making it. Thank you.